Welcome to the Theology Made podcast. I'm Dr. Jordan Vale. In today's episode, we're going to look at the man who invented probability, then staked everything on faith. In the autumn of 1662, a servant in Paris was going through the clothes of a man who had just died. The man had been sick for years. He had stomach pains that came and went. He had headaches that never really lifted. And he was 39 when his body finally quit. By the end, he could barely keep down a meal. The servant reached a heavy coat and ran a hand along the lining. And then the fingers stopped on something. There was a small lump stitched into the fabric near the chest. Someone fetched a knife and they cut the threads. Inside was a folded piece of parchment with a paper copy wrapped around it in the same handwriting. The parchment held no will, no final instructions for the family. It described a single night, written down 8 years before, and he had carried it against his chest every day since. Every time he bought a new coat, he cut the packet out of the old one and stitched it into the new. He told no one. For 8 years, the most important thing he owned wrote an inch from his heart, and not a single person in his life knew it was there. To understand why a dying genius would do that, you have to go back to a boy who, by the standards we usually use to measure people, should not have been possible. He was born in 1623, in the middle of France. His mother died when he was 3, and his father raised him at home and made one bizarre decision early on. He kept mathematics away from the boy completely. No books on geometry, no lessons. The father worried the subject would swallow everything else, so he essentially locked it out of the house. It didn't work. The story his older sister told years later was that the boy started doing geometry anyway, alone on the floor of a playroom with a piece of charcoal on the tiles. He had no words for any of it, so he invented his own. A circle he called a round, a line he called a bar. And working with nothing but charcoal and his own attention, he reportedly proved on his own that the angles inside a triangle add up to the same as 2 right angles. He was 12. By 16, he had written a paper on geometry good enough that grown mathematicians in Paris refused to believe a teenager wrote it. One of the most respected among them assumed that had to be the work of the boy's father. And then he built a machine. His father had taken a government post collecting taxes, which meant endless nights adding long columns of figures by hand. So the son, around the age of 19, designed a box of interlocking gears that could carry the 1 automatically every time a column passed 9. You turned a dial, and the machine did arithmetic. He built close to 50 versions of it, eventually landing on a design that actually held real use. It was one of the first calculating machines in human history. 3 centuries later, when engineers needed a name for a unit of pressure, and again when computer scientists needed a name for an early programming language, they grabbed his. Because this was the thing about him. He believed the world could be counted. And you can see it everywhere in his early life. He climbed into the question of the vacuum, whether empty space could even exist, a question that had stumped people since the ancient Greeks. He arranged for tubes of mercury to be carried up a mountain to show that the weight of the air drops as you climb higher. He was right. He could weigh the atmosphere itself. He could measure the invisible and hand you a number for it. And then in the summer of 1654, a gambler brought him a question that would extend its reach for the next 400 years. The gambler wanted to know how to fairly split the pot in a game of chance that gets interrupted before it ends. 2 players are partway through. The game stops. Now, who deserves what? It kind of sounds like a small thing, but it's actually not small at all, because buried inside was the problem of predicting the future when you can't see it. And so he started writing letters about it to another brilliant mathematician, a man named Pierre de Fermat. The letters went back and forth through that summer, and between the two of them, working on a problem from a card table, they laid the foundations of probability theory, the mathematics of risk, the mathematics that every insurance company, every casino, every stock model, every weather forecast on Earth still runs on today. They took the future, the thing no one can see, and at some level, they made it calculable. By the autumn of 1654, he was 31 years old. He had taught the human race how to put a number on what had not happened yet. 3 weeks later, something happened to him that he could not put a number on at all. The date was November 23rd, 1654, sometime around 10:30 at night and lasting maybe 2 hours. He had an experience he never fully described to anyone. We only know what happened because of the paper sewn into his coat. We know roughly when because he wrote the date at the top of the page. The first word he wrote was fire. Capital letters, one word, sitting alone above everything else. And underneath that were broken phrases. And they read like something had a grip on the man who was known for always being so certain. He wrote about weeping for joy, and he wrote a line that's followed him ever since. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not the philosophers and scholars. Wait, huh? This is the philosopher. He is the scholar. The man who weighed the air and tamed the future with arithmetic. But here he's writing in the dark that the God he had just met was not the God you arrive at by thinking hard enough. He had spent his entire life reaching truth by the force of his own mind. And the most important thing he ever encountered, he said plainly, did not come to him that way. He didn't write a treatise about it the next morning. He folded the page, sewed it into his clothing, and went on living. The smartest man in France kept the most important night of his life as a secret he wore under his shirt. After that night, the mathematics mostly stopped. He turned towards faith with the same intensity he had once aimed at numbers. He moved into the orbit of a strict religious community outside of Paris, and he threw his whole mind at theology. He wrote a series of public letters defending faith that are still studied today as some of the sharpest prose in the French language. And he began a great book, a defense of the Christian faith aimed at people who had already given up on it. He never finished that book. He died first. What survived were the fragments, scraps, and half-thoughts found among his papers, gathered up and printed after he was gone. We call them pensées, which simply means thoughts. And in those fragments sits the strangest move of his entire life. That the man who invented the mathematics of betting decided to bet on God. He laid it out the way he once laid out a card game. You cannot prove God exists by reason alone. He admitted that. The mind cannot carry you all the way there. So you stand in the position of a gambler who has to wager before the outcome is known. Then wait, he said. Bet your life on God and turn out wrong, and you've lost very little. Bet against God and turn out wrong, and you've lost everything you had. Under that kind of uncertainty, the reasonable wager is faith. Think about what he's confessing here. The greatest mind of his generation, and of many generations around him, the man who could prove the things other people only guessed at, looked at the question of God and did something no one would have expected from him. He reached for a wager, and he of all people knew exactly what that meant. A proof compels you. A wager is the thing you reach for when proof has run out. And for the one question that mattered more to him than any other, he was telling you, proof has run out. He had spent his life proving things. The single most important thing he ever found, though, he couldn't prove. He could only wager on it, and then sew the memory of that night he found it into the lining of his coat. There's a line in those fragments that has outlived almost everything else he wrote. People who have never even heard his name, they've probably said it, or at least heard it secondhand, read it on greeting cards, or heard aloud in a wedding toast. The line is this: the heart has its reasons, that reason does not know. And in most mouths, that's a soft little sentiment with the clinging of champagne glasses in the background. But for him, it was meant as surrender. This is the person who built the calculating machine. This is the person who weighed the sky. When he tells you there's a kind of knowing the mind cannot reach, he's not going soft and feely on you. He's reporting back from the farthest edge of what a brilliant mind can do and telling you, actually, the edge is real. I was standing on it. Pascal was as clever as human beings get, and he spent the back half of his life insisting that cleverness has a limit, and that he found something waiting on the other side of it. He died at 39, worn down, in pain, surrounded by people who had no idea what he was carrying, and he left the proof of his deepest conviction in the only place he trusted. Books can be argued with. His own chest could not. So that's where it stayed, an inch from his heart, through every coat he ever owned, until the day a servant felt a lump in the lining that should not have been there. We tend to assume the smartest people in the room have the shortest path to the truth, that if you're only clever enough, you can think your way to anything worth having. But Blaise Pascal was as clever as they come, and his life says otherwise. Thanks for listening to the Theology Made podcast. If this was helpful, please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on.